George?
Okay, Robin, thanks. We're going to turn now to the war against the Taliban and al-Qaeda. The Obama administration has dramatically stepped up drone attacks against the Taliban, many crossing into the border into Pakistan. The offensive coming as intelligence signals new terror threats against targets in Europe. We're going to talk to Bob Woodward, author of Obama's Wars, in his first live interview about how this fits into the president's battle plan. But first, the latest from Martha Raddatz. Martha?
Good morning, George. There is great concern this morning that France, Germany, or Britain could face a terrorist attack at any time, which is one of the reasons the CIA has stepped up drone attacks in Pakistan's tribal areas. We were on the Pakistani border with Afghanistan just a few weeks ago with military officials who talked about the threat from the tribal areas. So far this month, there have been at least 20 drone strikes. That is the largest number of strikes ever. There have also been U.S. helicopters targeting militants in Pakistan. 3 strikes this month, also a record. The news of the increased threat from Pakistan and the stepped-up drone attacks comes as Obama's wars continues to create shockwaves from the Pentagon to Kabul. Bob Woodward describing dramatic and intense White House sessions last fall, pitting President Obama against his military leadership. With the war in Afghanistan getting worse by the day, the president wanted a number of options on the table before deciding on a new strategy. But author Bob Woodward told Diane Sawyer Mr. Obama was getting only one option from the military leaders, committing at least 40,000 additional troops.
At one of the meetings, if I can quote him directly, he just says, "I'm pissed." And he is, because they keep coming back about details.
Finally, the president grew so frustrated, he sat down and dictated a 6-page document defining the military mission, a mission that he said required significantly fewer troops than the 40,000 minimum the military wanted.
I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan.
General David Petraeus did acknowledge in an interview just a few weeks ago that there had been intellectual friction with the president.
He wanted to leave no stone unturned, no assumption unchallenged, and I think it was very, very useful. I think what came out of that were indeed more measured expectations.
There is some promising news out of Afghanistan this morning, with General Petraeus saying that high-level Taliban leaders are now making efforts to reconcile with the Afghan government, but Afghanistan still poses a huge problem for President Obama. George?
Martha Raddatz, thanks. And joining us now is Bob Woodward, the author of Obama's Wars. Thanks for coming in this morning. There's so much to talk about, but let's begin with the news of the morning. Stepped-up drone attacks, 20 this month against Pakistan. But one of the things you point out in Obama's Wars is this has been a theme of the entire administration from the very beginning. This is something the president has been very aggressive about.
He has, but what's interesting, the former CIA director Mike Hayden warned Rahm Emanuel, the chief of staff, that you don't solve the Pakistan safe haven problem with drone attacks. Lessons of Vietnam, World War II, you can't change the conditions from the air. You have to get boots on the ground, and the current CIA director, Leon Panetta, is quoted saying, we have to get boots on the ground. We have to get in there where these safe havens are that are harboring al-Qaeda, which is targeting not just Europe, but the United States.
But that is something the Pakistanis have been very reluctant to give any approval to.
Yes, but I mean, it's kind of a wink and a nod, and we're clearly at the point where we're just going to go ahead and do it, because the madness of conducting a war where literally the Taliban has safe haven in Pakistan, and there is all this aerial surveillance showing trucks of fighters, Taliban insurgent fighters, going from Pakistan, where they rest and rearm themselves, being waved into Afghanistan through Pakistani checkpoints. And what are they doing? They're going into Afghanistan to kill American soldiers.
You mentioned Rahm Emanuel, likely that he'll leave by the end of the week. In Obama's Wars, he's clearly a big player in the war councils, doubtful that this war can succeed in Afghanistan.
He's the skeptic. He says Afghanistan is political flypaper. You get stuck to it, you can't get off. And at one of the meetings, President Obama literally says, nothing would make Rahm happier than if I said no to the 30,000 more troops.
So what difference does it make if he leaves?
It depends on who. I mean, Rahm, as you know, is one tough cookie, and if there's something going on that the president doesn't like or he doesn't like, he goes in with the hammer.
You mentioned that scene where the president, it was almost a Freudian slip. He said Rahm would be happy. Nothing would make Rahm happier. There's another scene where he is talking to Secretary Gates, I believe, where Gates had been reluctant to sign on to the president's compromise, and the president himself says, I'd be happy to go with 10,000 troops in Afghanistan and, quote, hope for the best. And I think it is one of many scenes in the book, and it's what struck me most about the book, where you see the president's deep ambivalence about this strategy. And it appears in many, many scenes throughout this book that the president is approving a compromise that he doesn't fully believe in.
Well, I think it's a compromise, and so I think he clearly embraces it, but he wants out of Afghanistan. He says repeatedly in these top secret meetings, I'm not doing 10 years, I'm not going to spend $1 trillion. And you look at this, when I interviewed him, I said, well, you can't lose a war on your watch. And he said, well, I don't think in terms of winning a war or losing a war. I want the country to be better off. And the thing you never see in all of these discussions is a president stepping up like he did in his political campaign in 2008 and say, yes, we can.
And that's what gets your Washington Post colleague, David Ignatius, foreign policy columnist, he wrote about your portrayal of the president, and he said this: Woodward shows us an Obama who is halfway to war, doubting his strategy even as he asks young men and women to die for it. That's the one thing a president must not do: sacrifice lives for a policy he doesn't think can succeed.
He is an intellectual, as we know. He's the law professor, and he's looked at the facts on the ground in Afghanistan, which I lay out. It's a dreary picture, and he can see, in fact, last spring at the end of one of these briefings, he said, given that definition of the problem, I don't know how we're going to come up with a solution. And so intellectually, he realizes real hard. He knows as commander-in-chief he has to do something.
And he's not alone in these doubts. Again, something so striking that comes across throughout the book are how many key players on the president's team also don't fully believe in this. Richard Holbrooke, longtime diplomat, special diplomat for Afghanistan and Pakistan. It can't work. Major Doug Lute, the president's military advisor inside the National Security Council. This is a house of cards.
Yes.
Even General David Petraeus, and this is all from your book, even General David Petraeus, the architect of the strategy, says, I don't think you win this war. I think you keep fighting. So you have all these doubts. You have a president who insists, I'm not going to be there for 10 years.
Yes, that's right. And this is why I've written about this, because the question that pulses throughout any long inquiry like this is, who is Barack Obama? Who is our president? And for the first time, you can see his internal struggle, his intellectual struggle, his dealing with the military, his dealing with his political advisors, and he set a course. The problem here is so much is unsettled. The relationships are not settled. How long are we going to be there?
And they are changing again, and we are now facing another review in December. Already White House aides saying, well, this isn't going to be a big deal. We're probably going to continue on the same course for a while. The president promising the troops are going to come down in July 2011, but already a battle again between the military and the political advisors over how deep that withdrawal is.
Precisely. And so we have in this the definition. I mean, this is one of the things that is going to define the Obama presidency, but in a more important way to people, particularly families out there who have somebody in Afghanistan. What is the level of, there is the X factor in any battle, and I guess I would call it the will to win. We're just going to do it. And I suspect as all of this goes out and people look at it, the president's going to have to give some speech or get out and say, look, this is really where I stand. This is what we're doing. This is where we go from here to there. I talk about unsettled. The relationships in the White House, there's lots of infighting. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs don't get along. Bob Gates, the Secretary of Defense, there's a scene in the book where President Obama asks him to stay for the whole term, 4 years, and Gates doesn't want to do it. Gates concludes the president sounds like a rug merchant, trying to get him to stay a little bit longer. Gates is going to leave sometime next year, so you have the key player.
But he did stay longer than he planned originally.
Yes, he did. But you have the Secretary of Defense, and Gates gets justifiable praise in all of this. He has 1 foot out the door. You know, in any institution, when somebody has 1 foot out the door, can they lead?
That is going to have to be the last word. The book is Obama's Wars. It is fascinating as always. Bob Woodward, thanks very much. Time now for Juju Chang with the rest of the morning's news. Hey, Juju.
Hey, George. Amazing insights into the war room. We're going to turn now, though, to stark new data on post-recession America. The income gap between the rich and the poor is now the widest on record. Census figures show the top earning 20% of Americans, those making a 6-figure salary, received nearly half of all income generated last year. Top earners added to their income, while families at the $50,000 level slipped lower, and the level extreme poverty hit a record high.